After Joseph preserved his family in the land of Egypt at the end of the book of Genesis, the people of Israel grew from a family into a great nation while dwelling in Goshen. In chapters 1 and 2, we see the cruel oppression of a threatened Pharaoh and the birth of God's deliverer. God hears the cries of his people and begins his great work of taking Israel to the land of the promise. The sermon text this morning is Exodus chapter 1, verses 7 to 14, and chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water."
Just a refresher for those of you who haven't been in English class for a while, if you remember what an irony is when an outcome or a result is in contrast to that which is expected. So, for example, let me give you two. William Eno was, he's called the father of traffic safety. You may not know that, but he's the one who invented the stop sign, and he's the one who invented the one-way street to make our roads safer. Now, William Eno never had a driver's license, and he could never drive a car, but he was the one defining all the traffic safety for us. Or Emerson Moser. He was the CEO of Crayola Company, that is the crayon company. You know, all the crayons that are produced. He worked there for 35 years as a CEO. He was colorblind. So these are things you don't expect. Now, the Bible is full of ironies. The Bible is full of them. One in particular, that God does amazing work through weakness. And what seems insignificant, he does great things. And this is what we see in the story of Exodus. The story of Exodus is full of ironies of how God will bring down a kingdom through the birth of a child. He's going to bring down a kingdom. For those of us who face struggles and trials, this is good news for us, because we often look at things and we expect a certain result based upon what we see. But God works ironically. He takes things that you don't expect, and he brings about results that are really quite significant and different than you might ever perceive. So as we study this book of Exodus, we're going to be looking at it. Exodus has no stated author. Tradition in the New Testament would ascribe authorship to Moses. It's the second book of the Bible. It follows Genesis. Now, as you remember, we finished Genesis last year. We took 4 years looking through Genesis in pieces. Genesis, if you remember, is a record, a trustworthy record of God creating all things good by his word. And we read in Genesis, he creates all things good, but then, of course, the sin of the man and the woman mar his creation. But God has a design for his world. He's going to create a people, and they will be for himself, and they will be with him. And sin will not stop that. And we see that immediately on the pages, 3rd chapter, there's a promise that God makes that this deliverance will come through the seed of a woman, through the son, an offspring of the woman. And this woman's son will crush the head of the serpent. And the seed of the serpent is going to crush the head and bring us back to a place of goodness. That was the plan. And that promise that God made is echoed through the chapters in Genesis. We saw it go to Noah, and we saw it amplified and clarified to Abraham, where God makes a covenant with Abraham. He says, to you a nation will come, and a seed will go through that nation to bless all the nations, and you will have a land, and you'll be with me. That was the promise made to Abraham. And then that promise was furthered to Isaac, and the promise was then furthered to Jacob. But this promise was challenged all along the way. It was challenged by infidelity, by infertility, by idolatry. And it was ultimately challenged by famine. And that's where we end up in the book of Genesis. This famine hit the land. And so they marched to Egypt. But even there, God was protecting and providing by sending Joseph through slavery to Egypt to be raised up to the second in charge to provide for the nation of Egypt and the nation of Israel. And so they're down there in Egypt being protected. Even there, God was providing for them. But Genesis ends with Joseph dying. And in his dying words, he reminded them this was not their home. God is providing a place for you. In fact, you find it in chapter 50 of Genesis. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, surely God will visit you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So on his dying bed, he tells them, this is not your home. God will bring you back. That's how we end in Genesis, an exiled people in Egypt. So what's going to happen? Well, Genesis ends. Exodus begins. It's interesting. Exodus is the second book, but I want you to see it as a perfect continuation of Genesis. I say that for two reasons. Number one, in Genesis 46, you have this lineage of the 70 that went down. And in Exodus chapter 1, you have the exact same lineage. The same 70 are recorded as being in Egypt. But what's interesting is the book of Exodus begins with the word and. Now, you don't see that in many of your translations. I was always told in English class not to start a sentence with and, but Moses did. And Moses did because he wants us to see it as a continuation of what he was doing in Genesis. And so, he's saying, and he's continuing this book. Now, Genesis 1 and 2 are going to set the stage, if you will. They're going to set the stage for all that's going to follow. And I want you to see what happens, because immediately what we find in Exodus is that the people are growing. And they're growing according to the promise of God. But that's not unnoticed among the Egyptians. And it's not without fear. And so all of a sudden we have here in our passage, what's going to be setting off a chain of events that will lead to God performing the greatest act of deliverance in the Old Testament. But it's going to be a picture, because God's going to deliver them from slavery. He's going to draw them out so that they can be a people unto himself, and that God will be with them. He'll be tabernacling among them. This is really the story of the Bible. God drawing us out of slavery. Not just to forgive us and to free us and to liberate us, but to draw us to himself, that we would be a people for God and that he would be with us. We're going to see this beautiful picture of what Jesus Christ has done. We're going to read it right on through in Exodus. So we begin with oppression of a people, and then we see the birth of a deliverer. So look with me at the oppression of a people. Look with me in the first verses that were read, 7 through 12. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. Now, what's significant here, where we pick up this story, is that the people are growing. Remember now, the people were invited, right? They were invited to Egypt, and they did well. They prospered. They succeeded. But what do we find here? Well, we find some news. Then a new king arose, and the new king did not know Joseph. Now, we all know in politics, it's who you know. And he didn't know Joseph. And so Joseph, the revered, the respected man in Egypt, was now forgotten. And with the forgetfulness of Joseph, so you have the resentfulness to his people. And so what do we find? This king is in fear. He's claiming a national threat. There was no known wars. There was no known threat. But oftentimes that fear is made national. And our country is threatened. So we need to come together and deal shrewdly with them. And so here, this Pharaoh, this king, hatches a plan with his advisors to begin to subjugate the people of Israel. He's going to turn a perceived threat to a profit by making them work to build these cities. And so he makes them begin to build. And he increases their labor. He increases. It's becoming ruthless and bitter. But what does it say? They continue to grow. That's interesting. That's meant to kind of surprise you if you're not. But then he ups the ante, right? Because verses 15 on, he commands the Hebrew midwives, these women helping other women give birth. He commands them, if it is a male child, then you are to kill it immediately. He's thinking of tapping down this threat of this foreign nation in his nation by killing all the male children. But you know what it says? It says that the Israelite women were too strong, and they were giving birth to children before they could get there, these midwives. Kind of a slight dig, if you will, later into the Egyptian. They needed them, but these Hebrew wives did not. So he ups the ante a little more. You see this at the end of chapter 1. He says, and Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrew, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Friends, this is straight up genocide, right? This is, whoever there is among you, if you see a Hebrew child born, you take that child and throw him in the river. It's making the Nile a graveyard. It's killing all the male children. This is incredible oppression and tyranny. We're supposed to be sitting wondering what's going to happen to the promise. What's going to happen to the people of God? What's going to happen to all the things that God said through the book of Genesis? All these promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, will they come true? That's the threat. But notice what's happening. It says the more they were oppressed, the more they grew. They became fruitful. They multiplied. Friends, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to know that fruitful multiply. What's it draw your mind to? It draws your mind back to the beginning, Genesis chapter 1, where he says to the first man and the first woman, be fruitful and multiply. It was God's command that they would produce people, that we would grow, that God's people would grow and they would be with him. God's plan is not being thwarted by Pharaoh. Pharaoh is an anti-creator here. I want you to see him as an anti-creator. He is coming against God's designed creation. But it wasn't just given to Adam and Eve. It was given to Noah. It was given to Abraham. God had designed. So when they're being fruitful and multiplying, what we're to see here in this scene is God's promise in creation. Its furtherance in the covenant that he made with Abraham. It is being challenged by Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh is coming against God's plan. Pharaoh is the seed of the serpent, trying to crush and trying to kill the seed of the woman. He's facing God himself. And what's it say in verse 12? But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, the more they spread abroad. He's tangling with God. And yet God is growing his people through oppression, through difficulty and hardship. So what do we do here? You have in this first chapter this tyranny, this oppression. I think Moses is painting two portraits for us, a portrait of our world and a portrait of God. The first portrait is of our world. You know, for a while, liberalism would teach that, listen, man is really a clean slate, and if you just get the right philosophy and ideology, if you get the right education, the right political systems, then we're going to do all right on our own. And there is no historical proof for that in all the history of mankind. You see tyranny and oppression in every century, in every generation. You see one people subjugating another people over and over. In my own lifetime, ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, the Tutsis and the Hutus. There is my parents' generation, Hitler and the Final Solution. You see generation after generation of subjugation, oppression, tyranny. Why is this? The idea that a new king can come, or a new administration, or a new philosophy, or a new technology, and it's going to somehow right the problems we have, it's a fool's errand. I think what we see here is in Pharaoh, you see a picture of humanity that's always in opposition to God. It's man in rebellion to God. Why do I say that? Well, notice what Pharaoh said when he says, come, let us deal shrewdly with him. Interestingly, in Genesis chapter 11, when all the nations were gathered together, they said the same thing. Come, let us build brick and mortar. Come, let us build a tower and make a name for ourselves. Moses is understanding. We're going to read both books. We're going to connect the dots. And so we're going to see Pharaoh as representative of mankind rebelling against God. That's what we do as people. We want to be God. And so we'll always be filled with tyranny. So the oppression that we see, the tyranny, the racism, the sexism, the desire for ethno cleansing, that's always going to be. And we're to see the world, and we're to see this is why we need one to come and deliver. This is why we need. There is no hope. I'm not a despairing or morose individual at all. I just want to make sure and sink my hope where it will produce. I don't want to hope or wish upon a star. I want to hope upon something solid and certain, and it is not. Scriptures tell us it over and over. Don't put your trust in princes. Strength of a horse won't deliver. It's those who fear the Lord. So I think we have a portrait of our world right here that we're to take a good look at and to recognize. But I think we also have a portrait of God. And what we have of God is this. Now, when we face this oppression, we often think God's distant. He's gone. Where is he? He's not present with me. We think he's there in times of good, but we don't think he's there in times of bad. But notice what we find here is God is working, but we don't see it. There's no mention of God. There's a reference to God in the first chapter. There's no mention of God. He's not there, but he is there. He's working. It's just not visible to you. Notice, the more they were oppressed, the more they grew. God could have prevented them from entering slavery. No, he brought them in slavery to lead them through slavery. What he's teaching us here is a paradigm that God works through suffering. Suffering is not sovereign. We don't know what's going to happen to us this year. You and I have no idea what will befall us this year. With 2026 before us, we don't know what's coming. But what we know is that whatever comes, whatever trial, adversity, affliction, or joy and goodness, that God is in the midst of it. God takes his people through that. God actually uses suffering to achieve his plans. Friends, what I'm calling you to do is I want to call you to faith for this year. For whatever affliction or adversity you're going to face, whatever level it is, small, medium, or large, I want you to see that affliction and adversity is to cause us to appeal to God, to run to God, to begin to seek God. How are you leading us? How are you working in this? It was Spurgeon who said, I kiss the wave that throws me upon the rock of ages. I kiss the wave that throws me upon the rock of ages. Why? Because this oppression is causing us to go to God, to see the foolishness of man, to not put our hope in things created, but in the one who has created all things. This is the hope that we have. So here you see in this first chapter, the people are being subjugated and enslaved, but it's really revealing to them, you need deliverance. You need one to come to save. That's what the oppression is meant to instruct us. And the oppression is meant to remind us, God can work through this. This doesn't inhibit or thwart him. So that's chapter 1. But chapter 2, it's interesting. We're left with a tension. What's he going to do? Is there going to be some cosmic shock and awe? What's God going to do? How's he going to show up on the scene? Will he do it in a way that Hollywood loves, this big splash, the doors, and he enters with power and glory? No, it's not that way. No, he's going to come as a baby born of a slave. This could make for like an Advent series, couldn't it? Interesting how it plays that way, isn't it? He comes as a baby, born to a woman who's a slave. Look with me at chapter 2. He says, now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it, placed it among the reeds of the riverbank, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While a young woman walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman as she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Boy, this is an amazing story. You have these unnamed couple. They'll be named, but you won't hear about it until chapter 6. This unnamed couple, they get married, they conceive, they have a child. All we hear about the child is he's a fine child. He's a fine child. If I would have said that to Carol, I would have been in deep trouble. He was a fine child. He was a fine child. The word can be translated, he was a good child. Now, is this just the author giving some details? Is this just the loving eyes of a mother? No, I think there's something more going on, because the word can be translated good. This is a good child. Now, what does good mean? Good is a unique word in the sense that it's used a lot in creation. It was good, it was good, everything God did was good, it was good. All of his creation was good. It was very good. This is a good child. It's meant to begin to make us think, is this child going to have some impact on renewing the goodness of God's creation? Is this going to have I think it was. Now, I wouldn't just go on that translation of a word. The writer of Hebrews helps us here in chapter 11:23. He says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Now, so by faith, they're not just looking physically, oh, it's a fine child, it's a good child. They're acting by faith. Notice they said it was a beautiful child in this. Now, does that mean he's really handsome? I can go ahead and defy the king's edict? No, it's not that. They're seeing by God's Spirit something in this child. I don't know that what they knew, all that Moses would become, but they were seeing something in him that was unique and that was making them think the child had some role to play in the return of the goodness of God's creation through his ministry. Why do I say that? Because of what she did. What did the mother do? Well, she risked her life by hiding him for 3 months. And he crying baby, and they could have alerted the authorities and killed. She hid him for 3 months. But then what she did next was incredible. She puts him in a basket when she could hide him no longer. She covers it with this pitch and bitumen, and she puts him on the Nile. And what's going on here? Well, it's interesting. The word for basket is only used one other time, and it's used in Genesis for ark. So she puts him in an ark. And to make her intentions clear, she covers it with pitch and this bitumen, which was the same material that Noah used to build an ark. So what's she communicating to us? She sees by faith this child, perhaps in some way, is going to be like Noah. He's going to be saved above the waters of death. She put him in a graveyard. And that's where they were dumping the babies. So the whole Nile was a graveyard. It was a water of death. And yet he floats across it. And there's something being communicated to us here. This child's unique. It's a beautiful, good child. It's going to do something about this oppression and tyranny that we're facing. And so she puts him in that mini ark and sends him. You see the providence of God, right, in what follows as the story unfolds. The Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, just happens to take a bath at the moment that the basket is in the reeds. Servant happens to go get it and retrieve it. And when they uncover it and they see it's a Hebrew child, this is the princess of the king. She should throw him in the water, but she doesn't. She has pity on him. Is this Moses' good day? Is this just good? Man, you had a lot of luck that day. Is this really, it's just, the stars are lining up for you, Moses. No, we're to see the providence of God providing. And then Miriam, his sister, unnamed here, will be named later, she comes and approaches the princess and suggests the preservation of his life by having a nurse that could take care of the child. Happens to be his mother. It's a shock of shocks. So now the mother gets to nurse her child until he's weaned. And then upon being weaned, she brings him back. And he is raised in the house that wanted to kill him. I mean, it really is a fantastic story. I mean, what do we see of God here? I mean, at a minimum, let's just giggle over the irony of God. I mean, the irony of God and his providence is remarkable. I mean, think about all the ironies here. The mother is actually obedient to the king by putting the child in the Nile. She just does it in, let's say, an unconventional way. You see the irony of here, this Pharaoh's daughter is the one who sees him and has pity on him. You see the irony of Miriam, his sister, going up and suggesting the mother, who, incidentally, gets paid to nurse her own child. How many mothers would like that? Yeah, many. The irony of the house that had made the edict to have him killed is actually protecting him and instructing him and giving him all the wisdom of Egypt. How about the irony of this child will be the child that brings down the government that had taken care of him? Friends, do you see God works in ironic ways? We're not to assess our lives in a one-dimensional way without God. You know, when things come to us this year, we can't just look at them for what they are. There is a creator God. You know, I would say this to everybody, but particularly for the Christian, you especially, you know, because A.W. Pink makes the argument, even before Moses understands these things, God is protecting him. Even when we're unregenerate, God's providence is at play until we are regenerated. But for the Christian, can you trust with me that when things go sideways, that God might not have something ironic for you? Something, you know, there are many times I've prayed for things and I haven't gotten them. And then I've thanked them that I didn't get it. Or I've gotten things that were difficult, that I have grieved over receiving, and yet later on found that they were actually quite helpful to my soul. God's doing things in ways that we cannot understand. Many of you know the William Cooper poem, "Behind every frowning providence, he hides a smiling face." For the Christian, you can cast all your cares upon him because he cares for you. You know, this is the kind of God that we have that works in these ironic ways that it may take years fleshing them out. What you may go through now may be producing fruit in 5 and 6 and 10 years. That's the way God works. It isn't this cause-effect, this immediate response. There are twists and turns. So let's have a big view of God. So when things come in, let's be cautious about just assessing it and determining its value and then grading God upon it. Let's just wait a little bit. Let's let some more data come in. I think it would serve us well in our worship of God. But then, can you rejoice with me over his sovereignty being meted out through these ordinary people? Isn't it unbelievable? You don't see the name of God until the end of chapter 2, and yet all this work is going on. Through whom? 5 women. 5 women. The 2, and there may have been more midwives that defied the king courageously. Moses' mother, who by faith saw what God was doing through this child and put him on that mini ark. Miriam going up to the Pharaoh's daughter and speaking to her about these issues. And then Pharaoh's daughter himself. God uses 5 women. Is that funny? You don't see God, but he's doing this seed work of bringing down a kingdom by women. Does this challenge your view of what you think women are capable of for the kingdom of God? Women, it should challenge some of your views of yourself, what God might do. Does it challenge your view of God and who he uses to do his salvific work? Does it challenge your views of the people sitting next to you? God's providence is meted out through ordinary people. The people that you're sitting with, not the top 5%. You know, it always makes me it causes me to get frustrated when someone says, you know what, I got Jesus and the Bible, I'm good to go. Or I've got my little group of friends, I'm good to go. He doesn't work that way. It's cutting yourself off. God provides for his people through his people. Augustine said it this way: he who created us without will not save us without us. That's interesting. He created all things out of nothing, but he's going to use us to save us. That means we're really important. That means that your view of the church and your own commitment and covenant to one another is really essential for us progressing in faith in this pilgrimage. Can you marvel with me over that? And then can you marvel over the pattern that we have here? This story isn't about us getting through trials and adversities in 26. Because if we do make it through, guess what? We got 27. And we got 28, perhaps. The story really is bigger than that. The story is giving us a pattern. A pattern. It's probably the best Old Testament pattern of God's redemptive plan for the world. Why? Why do I say that? Well, because the story starts out with oppression and enslavement. And then a deliverer is born. And the deliverer comes to save. And he saves his people from their enslavement. But he doesn't liberate them just so they can go free and do whatever they want to do. He saves them so that they can become the people of God. And then becoming children of God, God dwells with them and blesses them, and they enjoy him. That's the story of Exodus, but that's the story of the Bible. So when you see this story of Exodus, you see the gospel, right? I mean, Moses was born into bondage. Jesus was born into bondage. Moses was born under an edict that all male children should die. Jesus was born under an edict from King Herod that all male children should die. And Moses was protected for a season by his parents. Jesus, Matthew 2, was protected by his parents, taking him down to Egypt. Moses was raised up to establish a covenant made by the blood of a lamb over the doorpost so that people might be liberated. To be God's children. Jesus, by his own blood, liberates a people. Not from enslavement to a nation, but enslavement to sin and shame and guilt. And he's liberated us, not just so that we could be forgiven and get the burdens off our shoulders, but so that we would be his people. And he then would dwell with us and be among us by his Spirit. You can't make this up. It leads us to the table. This table is a picture of Exodus. We reenact Exodus when we come to the table. You know, when you look at the covenant that Moses will establish, the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, God passing over and leading his people out so that he could dwell with them. And here now, Jesus establishes a better covenant. So he's like Moses, but better than Moses. That's what he says in Hebrews 3:3. He's better than Moses. Why? Because Moses' covenant was made in the blood of an animal that had to be repeated year after year after year. But Jesus has made a covenant in his own blood that will never have to be repeated because he's the eternal Son, sufficient to save fully, not predicated on your obedience, not predicated on what you become, but resting on Christ and his righteousness alone. This is a meal. This is an Exodus meal. When you come, you see his body broken, bearing our sin and shame and guilt. And when you look at the cup, it's a covenant that is permanent, beautiful, forever saving of us. It's a meal, though, for just the family of God. Nobody else celebrated this meal. And that's why I try to warn, I try to fence the table every month. I fence it by saying things like, if you don't have faith, not if you're thinking Jesus is a great guy, you come to the table. No, the table, the bread and the cup are for those who understand the depth of their need to be saved from themselves and from their sin and their shame. and that they want to be brought into a people, other people who are saved in the same measure. It's people that are walking out seeking peace in their relationships. It's walking out. It's for people who have been baptized. They want to identify with the one who enacted this meal. And they want to be identified with him, not in some closed-door way, but in a very public way. I'm going to be baptized in front of everybody. I'm going to tell you what I believe now. I didn't believe him. Now I believe him, and I love him. And I want to follow him. That's the kind of meal it's for. So this is a kingdom meal for kingdom people. Yes, it looks back to the Passover. And it looks back all the way to Exodus. But it also looks forward to the meal that we'll have with him when one day we rejoice with him at that marriage supper of the Lamb. So this table that we're about to celebrate is really an Exodus experience for us. And I do love it when people come up. You know, we've talked about it in times past. Should we go back to distributing it to everybody and not have them come up? But there's something about you coming up. It's a visual proclamation. I am a sinner and I need Christ. It gives me a chance to pray for you when you come up, which I do. It also gives me a chance to see who doesn't come up. So if there are weeks that go by or months that go by that you don't come up, then I may come to you and ask you why. So it's a beautiful reminder to us of the great gospel that you find so beautifully seen right here in the book of Exodus of all places. Friends, I pray, I ask you every year, do you love Christ more? Don't ask you that every week, but do you love him more? And love is sometimes a hard thing to measure. It can feel kind of subjective, but there are objective ways of measuring it. Are your affections growing for him that lead to greater obedience? Are there desires to see him more as you get older? You're not clinging to life, but we're beginning to let go of life. Are there a desire to read his word more, to follow him, to look like him more? Those are good measurements. Maybe ask your spouse or a friend, how do you see me loving Christ more? Because this table is meant to be one of those means of grace to help you, that you would say, I do love him more. I do want to walk after him more. I do want to see him one day. I don't just want a good life that is peaceful at the end. No, I want to see him, and I want to love him. Because the whole purpose of the Exodus was to be in the presence of God. So let's take a moment now, and we want to come to the table in a manner worthy. We want to heed his words of warning. And so let's take a moment and just silently confess what we need to say to God so that we can come for those who will come in a way that's right. And I'll pray for us in a moment. Be encouraged by these words. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus cleanses us from all sin. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But if we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us of all of our sin and to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. Father, would you grant to us the fullness of your Spirit, that we would comprehend your great love for us displayed in the bread and the cup, reminding us of the perfect Lamb of God who is named Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. Father, grant to us a deep, a profound joy one that wouldn't just be marked by a happiness over forgiveness, but a desire for us to be with you and one another as we celebrate this common family meal. And we pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.